People are waking up. They're starting to have their second tower moment. I talked about it on radio about how when we all saw the first tower at 9/11 get hit by the airplane, we thought, wow, that's weird. What's going on? That's horrible. When we saw the second tower hit by an airplane, we knew we were under attack. America is at war today. In recent weeks, I have told you about the dangerous Marxist aims of Black Lives Matter, Inc. They are working towards the complete transformation of the American society. And as part of that effort, they are attacking now the traditional nuclear family. This is from the BLM mission statement. Quote, "We are self-reflexive and do the work required to dismantle cisgender privilege." Cisgender privilege. In other words, the privilege that you and I have by sticking with the sex that we were born with. It's not just white privilege that you have to worry about. It's also cisgender privilege. But the mission statement goes on. When we gather, we do so with the intention of freeing ourselves from the tight grip of heteronormative thinking, or rather the belief that all in the world are heterosexual. But there is perhaps the most dangerous element of Black Lives Matter, the mission statement. It says this: we disrupt the Western prescribed nuclear family structure requirement by supporting each other as extended families and villages that collectively care for one another, especially our children. This goes on, but it is a scary statement for several reasons. But let me give you a couple. First, it echoes Marx and Engels' original communist dream of dismantling the nuclear family system and having the collective or the state be the primary caretaker of children. It's right there in Chapter 2 of the Communist Manifesto, Abolition of the Family. Second, Black Lives Matter, this statement is scary because the BLM organization, remember, it's BLM Inc., at this moment is not the same organization it was 5 years ago. It is much more powerful. It is in the driver's seat of the conversation right now, backed up by a wave of righteous indignation and over $1.6 billion in corporate donations. $1.6 billion. According to the Pew Research Center, 67% of Americans currently support the Black Lives Matter movement. That is truly amazing acceptance and support for an organization barely 7 years old. BLM has America by the ear, and no one is asking any serious questions about where it's leading us.
If this country doesn't give us what we want, then we will burn down this system and replace it. All right, and I could be speaking figuratively. Okay. I could be speaking literally. It's a matter of interpretation.
The problem is too few Americans are trying to interpret BLM's doctrine at all. How many black Americans know that BLM feels this way about the world, about their family? How many would actually agree? How many, if they knew what the BLM organization really believes, would change their answer they gave to Pew Research? Back to the mission statement of BLM. The nuclear family is not Western prescribed, it's human prescribed. You may have noticed cultures all over the world also have nuclear families as the basis of their societies. Families are the basic fundamental building block of all humanity and life itself. Never mind the decades of data about how the decline of the nuclear family has devastated our nation. To BLM, the nuclear family is outdated. It promotes cisgender privilege and therefore is dangerous and must be destroyed. In 1965, Senator Daniel Moynihan warned in his famous report that the long-term gains of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 could be jeopardized by the disintegration of black American families. He pointed out, for those actually seeking real and lasting solutions, you could not ignore this one fact. Quote, "The fundamental problem is that of the family structure. The evidence, not final but powerfully persuasive, is that the Negro family in the urban ghettos is crumbling. So long as this situation persists, the cycle of poverty and disadvantage will continue to repeat itself. Unfortunately, that prediction has come true in many communities all across the nation. And it is not safe to say at the moment, but BLM does not have the best interests of black Americans in mind, especially if dismantling the nuclear family is part of their mission, which it is. Read their own website. That part alone is totally counterproductive to what Martin Luther King Jr. talked about in the 1960s. He said, quote, "The group consisting of mother, father, and child is the main educational agency of mankind," end quote. According to research from the Brookings Institute, the best way for Americans of any race to avoid poverty as adults is to follow 3 basic rules. Finish high school, get a full-time job, and wait until you're at least 21 to get married and have children. For U.S. adults who follow those 3 rules, just 2% are in poverty, and almost 75% join the middle class. Single parenting is extremely difficult, and situations are complex. So this is not to take away from the heroic efforts of so many single parents, both women and men. But again, according to the Brookings research, children in female-headed families are 4 times more likely as children from married couple families to live in poverty. Now, despite decades of research and evidence affirming how vital the nuclear family is to the healthy children and healthy societies, Black Lives Matter is pushing their dangerous mission statement on school children because Marxists love a captive audience. In February of this year, Washington, D.C. public schools held a Black Lives Matter at School Week of action. Schools were given lesson plans how to teach students of all ages the Black Lives Matter 13 guided principles. These are taken directly from the BLM mission statement. And there it is, number 11, Black Villages, the commitment to disrupting the Western prescribed nuclear family structure. They even provided a fun coloring book for students to help reinforce those BLM principles. This initiative is a partnership with the D.C. Area Educators for Social Justice. They get grants from the Communities for Just Schools Fund. Who funds them? Well, among others, George Soros and his Open Society Foundation, of course. But why aren't more Americans aware of BLM's goal of normalizing every permutation of sexuality and dismantling the nuclear family? Because from day one of BLM's existence, mainstream media has consistently given the organization a free pass. The media focuses exclusively on race, never reporting on BLM's real agenda, and never asking questions about its major corporate donors. BLM founders Opal Tometi and Alicia Garza and Patrisse Cullors are feminists, self-described Marxists. Garza and Cullors identify as queer. There's a reason trans, queer, and anti-nuclear family issues are central to the BLM mission. It's because those issues are central to the lives of Garza and Cullors. Both of them have trans marriage partners. Tometi, Garza, and Cullors wrote the 13 Black Lives Matter principles along with a man named Darnell Moore. Moore is an LGBT activist. When Cory Booker was mayor of Newark, New Jersey, he made Darnell Moore the chair of the state's first LGBT Concerns Advisory Commission. In 2012, Moore was a member of an organization called Queers Against Israeli Apartheid. He also traveled to Palestine earlier that year as part of the first LGBTQ delegation to Palestine. After the trip, he wrote an open letter to LGBTIQ communities and allies on the Israeli occupation of Palestine, which calls for building an international boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement against Israel. Patrisse Cullors has also openly supported the BDS movement and Palestinian liberation. So Tometi, Garza, and Cullors, and more, together wrote the 13 principles of the BLM mission statement. Through BLM, this group is clearly seeking validation for their lifestyle choices, Garza told The New Yorker, quote, "We want to make sure that people are not saying, well, whatever you are, I don't care. No, I want you to care. I want you to see all of me." The BLM mission describes working for justice. That includes freedom for black, queer, and trans people. But people are already free to do that. The BLM goal is not about legalization, because that's already been achieved. The goal is transforming society into their image, and part of that effort means slandering traditional marriage and gender roles. So they associate the nuclear family with words like patriarchy and misogyny. If white privilege is a real threat, then cisgender privilege must be a real threat as well. And what represents cisgender privilege more than a mom and a dad raising their children according to their God-given sex? To BLM, that is oppressive and unreasonable. But it's not just the BLM founders' LGBT activism that informs their crusade against the nuclear family. It is also their Marxism. Here is Patrisse Cullors describing her activist background.
We actually do have an ideological frame. Myself and Alicia in particular are trained organizers. We are trained Marxists. We are super versed on sort of ideological theories.
In her 2008 memoir, she talks about her intellectual influences, including Karl Marx, Vladimir Lenin, and Mao. And then there's this.
I'm a trained organizer, and so I think sometimes people think that because Black Lives Matter is the biggest thing, that's the first thing I ever did, and it's not. I was trained knocking on doors, getting on buses and passing out flyers and getting people to join organizations. The Labor Community Strategy Center is my first political home. It's where I would be a part of what it's famous for, which is the Bus Riders Union.
Started by an old friend of mine,
Yes,
Eric Mann.
Eric Mann, that's my mentor.
So who is Eric Mann? Well, he was a leader in the Weather Underground domestic terrorist group. He was arrested in 1969 after an incident where 2 bullets were fired through the window of a police headquarters in Cambridge, Mass. He was charged on 4 counts, including conspiracy to commit murder and promotion of anarchy. He was convicted and spent 18 months in prison, but then, just like Bill Ayers, he went on to a long career of training young American Marxists. He created the Labor and Community Strategy Center in Los Angeles, where Patrisse Cullors showed up as a 17-year-old and spent the next 11 years being trained by Mann as a Marxist organizer. She calls Mann Strategy Center her first political home. She was Mann's protege. They even taught organizing workshops together. Here she is in 2010 talking about the book based on their workshop.
I was at the art publications table today, and I was speaking to this young person from Arizona who's trying to fight SB 1070. And he grabbed a book and he said, "It's like Mao's Red Book." And I was like, man, that's what I was thinking. And it was just really cool to hear him make that connection. I was like, how about you buy like 10 to 15 of these books?
Just to remind you, Mao was responsible for more than 25 million dead in his own country. In 2015, another of the 3 BLM co-founders, Opal Tometi, shared a stage in Harlem with Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro at an event honoring him. That same year, Tometi went to Venezuela to help oversee the country's fair elections. And if you still have any doubt about BLM's worship of Marxism, there is this gushing tribute to Fidel Castro written just after his death in 2016 by the Black Lives Matter Global Network. Quote, "As Fidel ascends to the realm of the ancestors, we summon his guidance, strength, and power as we recommit ourselves to the struggle of universal freedom. Fidel Viva." Marxists have always painted traditional nuclear families as a capitalist invention, but nuclear families are the flies in the ointment of collectivism. It is the basic building block of all life. It is the basic building block of society. Their real goal is to destroy everything that stands in the way of a powerful state. They're too independent if you're a family. You can't work towards state goals if you have a bunch of moms and dads that are teaching individual values. You can't do it with a family, and you can't do it with churches that understand freedom comes from God, and so does forgiveness.